The Imperial survey fleet moved through the darkness of space like silent hunters searching for new worlds to catalog and study. Commander Zalthar stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the stars pass by through the viewing screen. His scaled skin reflected the soft blue light of the control panels around him. The Kryn Empire had been exploring this region of space for 3 full cycles now, and they had found nothing but empty systems and dead rocks floating in the void. Zalthar was beginning to think this entire expedition was a waste of time and resources. His tactical officer suddenly made a clicking sound with his mandibles, which meant he had found something unusual. The officer's claws moved rapidly across his console as data streamed across multiple screens. Zalthar moved closer to see what had caused such excitement in his normally calm crew member. The readings on the screen made no sense at all. There were artificial structures on the 4th planet in the system they were approaching. The energy signatures coming from those structures were ancient beyond measure. The computer was estimating they predated even the first expansion, which had happened over 12,000 years ago. Zalthar felt his blood turn cold in his veins. Any civilization from that era should have been extinct for millennia, or evolved into something beyond physical form. The elder races had all either died out or ascended to higher planes of existence, according to every historical record the Empire possessed. Yet here were structures that appeared to be not only ancient but also active and generating power. The commander ordered his crew to send a reconnaissance drone down to the planet's surface to gather more detailed information. The wait for the drone to reach the planet and send back images felt like an eternity. When the first images appeared on the main viewing screen, the entire bridge crew fell silent. Massive cities sprawled across the planet's surface with towers reaching high into the sky. The architecture was unlike anything in the Imperial databases. The buildings seemed to defy the basic laws of physics with their impossible angles and graceful curves. Spires rose from the ground like crystals growing from the earth itself. Energy fields shimmered around key structures, creating protective barriers that the drone's sensors could barely penetrate. Transportation vehicles moved through the air between buildings with smooth fluid movements that suggested technology far beyond what the Empire currently possessed. The writing on the buildings was in a script that the translation matrix could not decipher at all. The computer kept cycling through every known language and alphabet in its vast memory banks but found no matches. Whoever had built these cities had used a completely unique form of written communication, but what truly shocked Zalthar and his crew were the biosignature readings coming from the cities below. There was life down there, abundant life. The sensors detected thousands upon thousands of living beings moving through the streets and buildings. Zalthar ordered a detailed analysis of the biosignatures. What came back made him question whether his sensors were malfunctioning. The genetic markers matched a species that the Empire had encountered only once before, in a remote sector nearly 200 years ago. The computer identified them as humans. Zalthar had read the reports about humans when he was studying at the Imperial Academy. They were classified as a primitive species that had barely achieved basic faster-than-light travel. They lived in a small system orbiting a yellow star, and had only recently begun exploring beyond their home planet. The reports described them as curious and adaptable, but possessing nothing particularly special in terms of technology or culture. Yet, here were human biosignatures on a planet, covered in cities that used technology the Empire could barely understand. The math did not add up at all. There was no way humans could have built what lay on the planet below. They simply did not possess the knowledge or capabilities required for such construction. Zalthar ordered his science officer to cross-reference the biosignature data multiple times. Each time the results came back exactly the same. Those were definitely human life signs. Thousands of humans were living in those impossible cities. The science officer was a young female named Vexra, who had graduated top of her class. She checked and rechecked the data with growing confusion visible in her body language. Her scales had turned a darker shade which indicated stress and uncertainty. She finally turned to face Zalthar and confirmed that there was no error in the readings. The genetic markers were unmistakable and matched the human database entries perfectly. Those were humans down there living in cities that should not exist. Zalthar stood silently for a long moment considering his options. This discovery would change everything the Empire thought it knew about humans and potentially about galactic history itself. If humans had somehow built these cities, then they were far more advanced than anyone had realized. If they had not built them, then the question became how they had come to inhabit them. Either answer had profound implications. The commander made a decision that he knew would alter the course of his life and possibly the fate of the entire empire. He would go down to that planet and get answers directly from whoever lived in those cities. He ordered his crew to prepare a landing party. They would take a shuttle down to the surface and attempt to make contact with the inhabitants. Zalthar selected 12 of his best officers to accompany him. He chose specialists in various fields including xenobiology, linguistics, tactical operations, and cultural studies. Each member of the landing party was briefed on what little they knew about humans and instructed to keep their weapons lowered but ready. They were to approach peacefully but be prepared for any situation. The shuttle was prepared and loaded with supplies and equipment. Zalthar put on his formal uniform, which bore the insignia of his rank and the symbols of the Kryn Empire. He wanted to make a good first impression on whoever they encountered below. The landing party assembled in the shuttle bay and boarded their craft. The bay doors opened, revealing the planet hanging in space below them like a jewel. The shuttle detached from the flagship and began its descent toward the surface. As they entered the atmosphere, Zalthar watched through the forward viewport as they passed over city after city. Each one was as magnificent as the last. Gardens and parks were visible between buildings, showing that whoever lived here valued nature, as well as technology. The energy readings grew stronger as they descended, showing just how much power these cities consumed and generated. Rivers of light seemed to flow through streets and between structures. The whole planet appeared to be one giant interconnected network of technology and life. The shuttle's computer identified what appeared to be a designated landing area near the largest city. Zalthar ordered the pilot to set down there. As they approached, they could see the landing pad was clearly designed for spacecraft. It had all the necessary markings and equipment for safe landings. This suggested that whoever lived here was familiar with space travel and expected visitors from beyond their world. The shuttle touched down gently on the pad and the engines powered down with a soft whine. Zalthar stood and addressed his landing party one final time before they disembarked. He reminded them to follow his lead and to avoid any aggressive actions unless absolutely necessary. They were here to learn and to establish peaceful contact if possible. The landing ramp extended with a hydraulic hiss and the door opened, revealing the alien world beyond. Zalthar took a deep breath and stepped forward into history. His officers followed close behind with their scanning equipment active and their weapons lowered but accessible. The air was breathable and pleasant, with a slight breeze carrying unfamiliar scents. The temperature was comfortable and the gravity was close to standard. Zalthar and his team walked down the ramp and stood on solid ground, looking around at their surroundings. The city walls rose before them, constructed of materials that seemed to shift colors in the light. The landing area was clean and well-maintained, suggesting regular use. In the distance, they could hear sounds of activity coming from within the city itself. They did not have long to wait before they had company. A group of figures emerged from the main gate of the city, walking toward the landing party with purposeful strides. Zalthar felt his muscles tense instinctively, but he forced himself to remain calm and still. As the figures came closer, it became clear they were indeed human, just as the biosignature readings had indicated. They wore clothing that appeared simple at first glance, but upon closer inspection seemed to be embedded with technological components that glowed faintly. The fabric itself seemed to shift and adjust to the wearer's movements in ways that suggested advanced materials science. The lead figure was a woman with dark hair pulled back from her face. She carried herself with confidence and authority that spoke of military training and command experience. Her eyes were sharp and intelligent as they studied Zalthar and his team. She raised her hand in what the Imperial database identified as a common human greeting gesture. When she spoke, her words were in perfect galactic common, though her accent was distinctly human. She introduced herself as Commander Lisa Grant of the Haven Defense Council. She welcomed them to Haven and said they had been expecting visitors to arrive eventually. Zalthar performed the traditional Kryn greeting, which involved a slight bow and a specific positioning of his arms. He introduced himself as Commander Zalthar of the Kryn Imperial Survey Fleet. He chose his next words carefully, because he was deeply confused by everything he was seeing and hearing. He told Lisa that his records indicated humans were a developing species from a system many sectors away. He asked how her people had come to be here, possessing technology that seemed far beyond what humans should have. His tone was respectful, but his confusion was evident. Lisa's expression changed, becoming more serious and thoughtful. She said it was a long story that spanned over 10,000 years of history. She suggested they discuss everything somewhere more comfortable because she was certain Zalthar and his team had many questions that needed answers. A man standing beside her stepped forward, introducing himself as Colonel Jake Morrison, who served as military liaison for Haven. Jake was tall with sandy-colored hair and wore what was clearly a military uniform of some kind. His bearing was that of a seasoned soldier who had seen combat and commanded troops. Jake explained that they meant no harm to Zalthar and his team, but they needed to establish some ground rules before proceeding further. Zalthar felt his tactical instincts flare because the statement carried an implied warning beneath the polite words. Jake calmly stated that Zalthar and his people were guests on Haven. They welcomed peaceful contact and were happy to share information, but Haven had defended itself for thousands of years. Jake said he hoped they could keep this first meeting friendly and cooperative. The threat was delivered diplomatically, but it was absolutely clear to everyone present. Zalthar made another quick decision based on his assessment of the situation. He stated clearly that he and his team were explorers and scientists who sought only knowledge and understanding. They had no hostile intentions whatsoever. Lisa smiled at his words, and the tension in the air decreased noticeably. She invited them to come with her into the city, so they could show Zalthar what humanity had built when they thought they were alone in the universe. The way she phrased it suggested there was much more to this story than Zalthar had imagined. The group began walking toward the city gates, with Lisa and Jake leading the way. Zalthar's team members were busy scanning everything around them with their instruments. The readings they were getting made them exchange worried glances with each other. Fexra, the xenobiologist, was muttering under her breath about impossible energy signatures and technology that should not exist. The city gates were massive structures that rose high overhead. They appeared to be made of a single piece of material with no visible seams or joints. Symbols were carved into the surface that glowed with soft light. As they passed through the gates, Zalthar got his first real look at a human city from the inside. It was breathtaking in its beauty and complexity. Buildings rose on either side of wide streets that were filled with humans going about their daily activities. Some walked, while others rode in vehicles that floated above the ground with no visible means of propulsion. Children played in parks while adults worked in shops and offices visible through transparent walls. The entire city seemed to pulse with life and energy. Gardens grew on rooftops and vines covered walls, creating a blend of nature and technology that was harmonious and appealing. Lisa led them through the streets toward what she said was the council chamber. Along the way, she pointed out various features of the city and answered basic questions from Zalthar's team. She explained that Haven was home to approximately 3 million humans, spread across 5 major cities on the planet. Each city specialized in different areas of research and production, but they all worked together as a unified civilization. The population was stable and sustainable, with birth rates carefully managed to maintain balance with available resources. Jake added that Haven had not experienced war or major conflict in over 6,000 years. Their society had evolved past the need for internal violence, and they had no external enemies, because no one knew they existed until now. He said this with a slight smile that suggested he found the situation somewhat amusing. Zalthar asked how they had achieved such lasting peace when most civilizations struggled with internal conflicts constantly. Lisa said it was partly due to their isolation and partly due to the lessons they had learned from studying ancient history, both human and alien. They arrived at a large building that Lisa identified as the council chamber. The structure was impressive, with flowing lines and surfaces that seemed to glow from within. They entered through doors that opened silently at their approach. The interior was spacious and filled with natural light that came through transparent sections of the walls and ceiling. Holographic displays floated in the air, showing various types of data and information. Comfortable seating was arranged in a circular pattern around a central area. The room was clearly designed for important meetings and discussions. Several other humans were already present in the chamber. Lisa introduced them as members of the Haven Council who governed the planet. There was an elderly man named Henry Walsh who served as chief historian, a younger woman named Claire Patterson, who was head of scientific research, a middle-aged man named Daniel Foster, who handled external relations, which Zalthar thought was ironic, given that Haven had no external relations until today. Each council member greeted Zalthar and his team with courtesy and interest. They seemed genuinely pleased to finally meet visitors from beyond their world. Everyone took seats and Lisa began to explain the history of Haven in broad terms. She said that 10,000 years ago, Earth had launched something called the Horizon Initiative. It consisted of 12 massive colony ships, each carrying 50,000 humans. The goal was to explore distant space and establish human settlements on viable worlds. The ships were equipped with the best technology Earth had at the time and carried carefully selected colonists representing the best of human knowledge and skills. Each ship had a different destination chosen based on astronomical surveys and probability calculations. The ship designated Horizon 7 experienced a catastrophic failure in its navigation systems. Lisa explained that a spatial anomaly of some kind had thrown the ship wildly off course. They ended up thousands of light years from their intended destination, with no way to calculate their position or return home. The ship's faster-than-light drive was damaged beyond repair. They had no choice but to search for a habitable planet in the nearby systems using conventional slower-than-light engines. After months of desperate searching, they found this planet, which they named Haven. Henry the historian took over the story at this point. He explained that the colonists had faced extinction when they arrived. The planet was habitable, but barely. The ship was damaged and running out of power. They had limited supplies and equipment. Most of the colonists wanted to give up and accept their fate. But a core group of leaders refused to quit. They convinced everyone that humanity could survive here if they worked together and were willing to adapt. They began the slow process of establishing a colony using prefabricated structures from the ship. Then something remarkable happened that changed everything. While exploring the planet's surface, the colonists discovered ruins. Ancient ruins left behind by a race that had vanished millions of years before. The ruins were unlike anything humans had ever seen. They were constructed of materials that did not decay or erode despite their impossible age. The architecture suggested beings with a completely different understanding of physics and engineering. But most importantly, the ruins contained technology, working technology that had survived across the eons, and most precious of all, they found archives, libraries of information stored in crystalline matrices that could interface with human computer systems. Claire, the scientist, spoke next, describing how the colonists had spent centuries learning to access and understand the ancient archives. The race that built them had called themselves the Forerunners, according to the translations. They had reached heights of technological achievement that seemed like magic. They could manipulate matter and energy at fundamental levels. Holographic displays activated around the chamber, showing images and data that made Zalthar's team gasp audibly. Henry the historian stood and moved to the center of the room where he could gesture at the floating displays. He said he would show them the complete history of Haven from the beginning to the present day. The first images showed the original colony ship Horizon 7 as it had looked when leaving Earth. It was a magnificent vessel built in orbit around humanity's home planet. The design was elegant and functional, representing the pinnacle of Earth technology at that time. Henry explained that the ship carried 50,000 colonists in suspended animation, along with embryo banks containing genetic material for millions more potential humans. The goal was to ensure genetic diversity in whatever colony they established. The crew consisted of 500 specialists who rotated duties during the long voyage. Among them were scientists, engineers, medical personnel, teachers, farmers, and artists. Every skill needed to build a new civilization was represented. The ship also carried extensive databases containing all of human knowledge up to the time of departure. The hologram shifted to show the navigation failure that had doomed the mission. Henry described how a previously unknown type of spatial anomaly had appeared directly in their flight path. The ship's sensors had detected it too late to avoid collision. When they passed through the anomaly, the faster-than-light drive suffered catastrophic damage. The ship was thrown across thousands of light years in an instant. When they finally stopped and assessed their situation, the crew realized they were completely lost. None of the stars matched their navigation charts. They had no idea where they were in relation to Earth or their intended destination. The next images showed the desperate search for a habitable world. The crew woke key personnel from suspended animation to help manage the crisis. They used the ship's damaged engines to hop between nearby star systems, looking for any planet that could support human life. Supplies were running low and the ship's power systems were failing. After 3 months of searching, they found this world. Initial scans showed it had breathable atmosphere, liquid water, suitable gravity and temperature ranges. It was not perfect, but it was their only option. They named it Haven, because it was literally their haven from death in the void. The images now showed the early colony struggling to survive on Haven's surface. The prefabricated structures from the ship were erected near a large freshwater lake. Agricultural domes were set up to grow food. Power generators hummed to life, providing electricity. The colonists worked day and night to establish their foothold on this alien world. Many died in those first years from accidents, disease, and the sheer exhaustion of constant labor, but slowly they adapted and the colony stabilized. Children were born who would never see Earth. The first generation of true Haven natives began to grow. Henry paused the images and looked directly at Zalthar. He said the colonists believed they would remain at this primitive survival level forever. They thought their descendants would slowly lose technological knowledge over generations until they became a simple, agricultural society. That was the expected fate of lost colonies according to historical patterns. But then came the discovery that changed everything. A survey team exploring beyond the colony perimeter found structures buried under vegetation and soil. At first they thought they were natural rock formations. Then they realized the formations were too regular and too precise to be natural. The holographic display showed the moment of discovery in dramatic detail. The survey team used their equipment to clear away the covering and revealed walls made of material unlike anything in human experience. The walls were covered in symbols and patterns that suggested writing or mathematical notation. They reported back to the colony, and a full expedition was organized. What they uncovered over the following months was beyond comprehension. An entire underground complex stretching for kilometers in every direction. Chambers filled with devices and equipment that still functioned after unimaginable ages. And at the heart of the complex was the archive. Claire Patterson stood and took over the explanation of what the archive contained. She said the crystalline storage matrices held information in formats that were partially compatible with human computer systems. The Forerunners had apparently designed their archives to be accessible to younger races that might find them. It took the colonists years to establish proper interfaces and begin downloading information. What they found was staggering in scope and depth. Complete records of Forerunner civilization spanning millions of years. Scientific knowledge covering physics, chemistry, biology, mathematics, and fields humans had no names for. Engineering principles for manipulating reality at quantum and subatomic levels. Claire explained that the Forerunners had been exploring the galaxy when life on Earth was still primitive, single-celled organisms. They had achieved mastery over matter and energy that seemed like magic. They could create artificial gravity, generate unlimited clean power, manipulate space and time within certain limits, and extend their lifespans indefinitely. They built cities that floated in the air, and ships that could cross the galaxy in days. Their civilization had lasted for millions of years in peace and prosperity. Then they had simply vanished, leaving only their ruins and archives behind. The archives contained no explanation for why the Forerunners disappeared. Claire said there were theories among Haven scientists, but no definitive answers. Perhaps they had ascended to a higher plane of existence. Perhaps they had destroyed themselves in some catastrophic event. Perhaps they had simply grown tired of physical existence and chosen to end. Whatever the reason, they were gone, but their legacy remained. And that legacy had been waiting for someone to find it. The colonists of Haven had been the lucky ones to stumble upon this greatest of treasures. Henry resumed the narrative, showing how the next generations of Haven humans dedicated themselves to learning from the archives. The first discoveries were in medical technology. The colonists learned how to cure diseases and repair injuries that would have been fatal. Lifespan increased dramatically as aging was slowed and health was maintained. This meant that individual humans had more time to study and learn. Scientists who might have had only a few decades of productive research time now had centuries. Knowledge accumulated faster as experts did not die and lose their accumulated wisdom. The holograms showed Haven growing and developing over the centuries. New cities were built using principles learned from Forerunner architecture. Power generation became clean and virtually unlimited, using quantum field manipulation. Agriculture was revolutionized, allowing massive food production in compact spaces. Manufacturing advanced to the point where raw materials could be arranged atom by atom into desired forms. Transportation evolved from primitive ground vehicles to graceful craft that moved through manipulation of gravitational fields. Every aspect of life improved steadily as more knowledge was unlocked from the archives. Daniel Foster spoke about the social evolution of Haven during this period. He said that access to Forerunner knowledge had profound effects on human culture and psychology. The archives contained not just technical information, but also philosophical and artistic works. The Forerunners had spent millions of years thinking about the nature of existence, consciousness, and civilization. Their insights influenced how Haven humans structured their society. Old conflicts over resources became meaningless when energy and materials were abundant. Power struggles faded when everyone had equal access to knowledge and opportunity. War became obsolete when violence solved nothing and cooperation achieved everything. Jake Morrison added that Haven had not always been peaceful. In the early centuries, there had been conflicts and disagreements. Different factions wanted to use Forerunner technology in different ways. Some wanted to focus on comfort and pleasure. Others wanted to explore the galaxy. Still others wanted to prepare for eventual contact with alien species. These disagreements sometimes became violent. But over time, Haven humans learned that cooperation produced better results than conflict. They developed governmental systems based on consensus and merit rather than power and wealth. The current council system had evolved over thousands of years of trial and error. Henry showed images of Haven's attempts to re-establish contact with Earth or find other human colonies. About 8,000 years ago, Haven had finally developed the capability to build ships that could travel faster than light using Forerunner-inspired technology. They sent expeditions back toward Earth using the best navigation data they had. None of those ships ever returned. They sent unmanned probes equipped with message beacons. The probes disappeared without trace. Every attempt to break through whatever barrier surrounded this region of space failed completely. They were trapped in their small corner of the galaxy, unable to reach out or call for help. Claire explained the scientific theory about why they could not leave. The same spatial anomaly that brought Horizon 7 to this region apparently created some kind of boundary effect. Ships and probes that tried to cross back through it were either destroyed or displaced to unknown locations. The barrier was not physical, but rather involved distortions in the underlying structure of space itself. The Haven Council granted Zalthar and his team unprecedented access to their society over the following weeks. What the Imperial officers discovered during this time fundamentally challenged everything they thought they knew about technological development and human potential. Vexra, the xenobiologist, spent her days touring research facilities that made Imperial laboratories look primitive by comparison. She watched Haven scientists manipulate matter at quantum levels with casual ease. In one laboratory, she observed the creation of entirely new elements that existed in stable forms despite what Imperial physics said was impossible. A young human scientist named Claire Patterson demonstrated a device that appeared to generate energy from absolute nothing. Claire explained in terms that Vexra struggled to follow that reality itself was far more flexible than most species understood. The Forerunners had discovered that what appeared to be vacuum actually contained infinite potential energy. The trick was learning how to access that energy without destabilizing local space. Haven scientists had mastered the technique after thousands of years of careful experimentation. The device Claire showed her was small enough to fit in a hand, yet generated enough power to run an entire city for a year. Vexra asked how such technology was even theoretically possible. Claire smiled and said that most species, including the Kryn, made incorrect assumptions about the fundamental nature of reality. They believed energy had to come from somewhere and be converted from one form to another. But the Forerunners understood that energy and matter were just expressions of underlying fields that permeated all existence. By manipulating those fields, directly it was possible to create or destroy energy at will. The math was complex, but the principles were elegant once you understood them. Claire offered to share the theoretical framework, but warned it would take years of study to fully comprehend. Meanwhile, the tactical officer Trenix visited Haven's defense installations with Colonel Jake Morrison. What Trenix saw made him profoundly grateful that they had approached Haven peacefully, rather than with hostile intentions. Jake showed him the orbital satellite network that surrounded the planet. The satellites appeared small and innocuous, but their sensor capabilities were staggering. Jake explained casually that the satellites could detect and track objects up to 3 light-years away. They could identify ship types, crew complements, weapon systems, and intent through analysis of engine emissions and communication patterns. Nothing approached Haven without being known and analyzed long before arrival. Jake brought up tactical displays showing the defensive capabilities that protected Haven. Energy shields surrounded not just individual cities, but the entire planet in multiple overlapping layers. The shields could absorb and redirect incoming energy weapons, rendering them harmless. They could also generate gravity distortions that would deflect or destroy physical projectiles and missiles. Jake said the shield network had been tested against simulated attacks equivalent to sustained bombardment from a full Imperial battle fleet. The shields had held without difficulty and power reserves had barely been depleted. Trenix asked about offensive capabilities because any military strategist knew that defense alone was not sufficient for survival. Jake's expression became serious as he activated new displays. He showed Trenix weapons platforms hidden in the asteroid belt and on Haven's moons. The platforms used directed energy weapons based on Forerunner principles. They could strike targets with pinpoint accuracy across vast distances. The energy beams could penetrate most known shield types and armor configurations. Jake emphasized that Haven had never needed to use these weapons at full capacity against actual threats. They existed as deterrents against a day that had thankfully never come. The conversation made Trenix deeply thoughtful. He realized that Haven could likely destroy the entire Imperial survey fleet in minutes if they chose to do so. The technological gap was simply too large. He asked Jake why Haven had not expanded beyond their planet or used their superior technology to dominate the region. Jake's answer was simple and profound. He said that Haven had learned from the IEC Forerunners that military might meant nothing without wisdom and purpose. The Forerunners had possessed the power to reshape the galaxy, yet they had chosen to live peacefully and pursue knowledge. Haven followed that example because they understood that true strength came from restraint, not from exercising power over others. Cultural officers from Zalthar's team explored Haven cities and observed daily life among the human population. They were surprised by the normalcy they found despite the advanced technology everywhere. Families gathered for meals and conversation. Children played in parks and attended schools. Adults worked at various occupations and pursued hobbies during leisure time. The technology enhanced life without dominating it. Automated systems handled most mundane tasks, leaving humans free to focus on creative and intellectual pursuits. But people still chose to cook food, tend gardens, create art, and maintain human connections that technology could not replace. The officers observed celebrations of ancient Earth holidays that had been maintained across 10,000 years of isolation. They saw humans gathering to commemorate historical events from both Earth history and Haven history. They witnessed artistic performances ranging from classical music to forms of expression that had evolved uniquely on Haven. The culture had grown and changed over the millennia, but had retained its essential humanity. These were not beings who had become cold and mechanical through technological advancement. They remained warm, emotional, social creatures who valued relationships and experiences. Education on Haven fascinated the cultural observers. Children began formal schooling at an early age, but education continued throughout life. The curriculum included not just technical knowledge but also philosophy, ethics, arts, and physical development. Students learned about Earth history, Haven history, Forerunner civilization, and what little was known about the wider galaxy. Critical thinking and problem-solving were emphasized more than rote memorization. Students were encouraged to question and explore rather than simply accepting what they were told. The result was a population that was highly educated, intellectually curious, and capable of innovation. Medical technology on Haven had achieved what seemed like miracles by Imperial standards. The Imperial medical officer and Zalthar's team toured facilities where humans routinely lived for centuries in perfect health. Diseases that plagued other species had been eliminated completely. Injuries that would be permanently disabling elsewhere were easily repaired. The medical officer watched in amazement as doctors regrew damaged organs and even restored neural tissue that had been destroyed. All of this was done without invasive, surgery using techniques that manipulated cells directly at the molecular level. A Haven doctor named Helen Brooks explained that medical science was one of the first areas where they had made breakthroughs using Forerunner knowledge. The archives contained detailed information about biological systems and how to maintain or repair them. Haven humans had adapted that knowledge to work with human physiology specifically. They could now cure almost any disease, repair almost any injury, and extend healthy lifespan almost indefinitely. The oldest living humans on Haven were over 900 years old and remained active and healthy. Death from old age had essentially become optional. People chose when to die rather than having death forced upon them by biological failure. The Imperial Medical Officer asked about the psychological effects of such extended lifespans. Helen said it had been a challenge initially. Humans evolved to live for decades, not centuries. Some early recipients of life extension treatments had struggled with the weight of so much time. But Haven society had adapted by emphasizing continuous growth and change. People reinvented themselves multiple times over their long lives. They pursued different careers, learned new skills, formed new relationships. The key was maintaining purpose and engagement with life. As long as someone had reasons to keep living, they thrived, regardless of their chronological age. Commander. Zalthar himself spent time with the full Haven Council discussing the implications of this first contact. The council chamber became a regular meeting place where both sides exchanged information and debated the future. Margaret Hughes, who chaired the council, was a woman of advanced age but sharp mind. She had served in her position for 30 years and showed no signs of diminishing capability. Under her guidance, the council functioned with remarkable efficiency and wisdom. Margaret asked Zalthar directly what he intended to report to the Kryn Empire about Haven. It was the question that had been hanging unspoken over all their interactions. Zalthar had been dreading this moment because he knew his report would cause shockwaves throughout Imperial space, and probably the entire known galaxy, a hidden human civilization with technology that surpassed the greatest powers. The implications were staggering and potentially destabilizing. Some in the Empire would see Haven as a threat to be eliminated. Others would see it as a prize to be claimed. Few would accept simply leaving Haven alone. Zalthar chose honesty as the best approach. He told the council that he would report everything he had seen and learned. He would describe Haven's history, technology, and peaceful nature accurately. 3 months after the initial discovery, Commander Zalthar stood before the Imperial Senate in the Great Hall on the Kryn homeworld. The chamber was packed with representatives from every major Kryn world and ambassadors from allied species. The air buzzed with speculation and tension because rumors about the discovery had spread throughout the Empire. Everyone knew something significant had been found, but details had been kept classified until this moment. Zalthar wore his formal uniform and carried the complete report of his findings. His scaled skin showed the stress of the past weeks in subtle color changes that other Kryn could read easily. He activated the presentation system and began showing images and data from Haven. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Gasps and exclamations filled the chamber as senators saw cities that defied their understanding of architecture and engineering. Zalthar methodically presented evidence of human presence on Haven, including biosignature data, video recordings, and direct testimony. He explained the history of the lost colony ship and the discovery of Forerunner archives. He detailed the 10,000 years of development that had produced Haven's advanced civilization. His presentation was thorough and professional, leaving no room for doubt or misinterpretation. Senator Carrix of the military faction was the first to speak when Zalthar finished. His voice was loud and aggressive as he demanded to know how anyone could believe that primitive humans had built such a civilization. He called the entire report fantasy and accused Zalthar of being deceived by clever forgeries and tricks. The senator's scales had turned dark red, indicating anger and suspicion. He insisted that the Senate reject this ridiculous claim and instead investigate what really existed on that distant planet. Other military faction senators voiced agreement, suggesting that Haven was likely some kind of trap or deception. Zalthar had anticipated this reaction. He calmly activated additional displays showing technical analyses conducted by his ship's computers. The data confirmed beyond doubt that the technology on Haven was real and functional. He showed recordings of his interactions with Haven Council members, including their demonstration of devices that Imperial science could not duplicate. He pointed out that Haven had allowed his team complete access to verify everything. If it was deception, it was the most elaborate and successful deception in galactic history. The evidence was overwhelming and irrefutable. Those were humans on Haven, and they had achieved technological heights that surpassed the Empire. The debate raged for hours as different factions argued about what the discovery meant and how to respond. The military faction wanted to send a fleet to occupy Haven and seize their technology by force. They argued that such advanced capabilities in human hands was too dangerous to be tolerated. The diplomatic faction urged caution, pointing out that any hostile action could trigger a conflict the Empire could not win. The economic faction saw opportunity, calculating the benefits of trade relationships with such an advanced civilization. The science faction wanted unrestricted access to Haven's knowledge regardless of the political implications. Senator Lyria of the diplomatic faction finally managed to quiet the chamber with a call for rational analysis rather than emotional reaction. She pointed out that Haven had existed peacefully for 10,000 years without threatening anyone. They had defensive capabilities but no record of aggression. They had advanced technology but had not used it to conquer or dominate. In fact, they had chosen isolation over expansion. This suggested a civilization that valued stability and peace over power and conquest. She argued that the Empire should approach Haven with respect and diplomacy rather than fear and hostility. Zalthar was called upon to give his personal recommendation based on his direct experience with Haven. He stood before the Senate and spoke with conviction. He said that attempting to take Haven by force would be the greatest mistake the Empire could make. The military would fail and suffer devastating losses. More importantly, it would turn potential friends into definite enemies. Haven humans had shown themselves to be reasonable and willing to share knowledge, but they had also shown they would defend themselves without hesitation. The intelligent path was to propose alliance and cooperation. Let Haven join the galactic community as equals, not as subordinates. The vote was contentious, but ultimately wisdom prevailed by a narrow margin. The Senate decided to send an official diplomatic delegation to Haven. The delegation would represent the Empire in formal first contact negotiations. They would explore possibilities for establishing peaceful relations and potentially forming an alliance. Other major galactic powers would be invited to send their own representatives, ensuring that Haven's emergence was handled multilaterally rather than unilaterally. The decision was cautious and measured, reflecting the Senate's uncertainty about how to deal with this unprecedented situation. 6 months passed as diplomatic preparations were made and various galactic powers were briefed on the Haven situation. Finally, the official delegation was assembled under the leadership of Ambassador Sixra. She was one of the Empire's most skilled and experienced diplomats, with a record of successfully negotiating complex agreements. The delegation included representatives from 3 other major galactic powers who had been shocked by news of Haven's existence. All of them understood they were participating in a historic moment that would reshape galactic politics. The delegation's ships arrived at Haven and were directed to landing zones that had been prepared specifically for this occasion. Haven had spent the intervening months preparing as well. They knew their isolation was ending and they needed to present themselves properly to the wider galaxy. Lisa Grant and Jake Morrison led the greeting party that welcomed the delegates. The formal first contact ceremony took place in Haven's Grand Plaza, witnessed by thousands of humans and broadcast to the entire galaxy through relay networks. It was a moment of tremendous significance for everyone involved. Margaret Hughes spoke first as council chair representing all of Haven. She said that for 10,000 years humanity had lived on Haven, building their civilization in isolation from the rest of the galaxy. They had watched the stars and wondered if they would ever reconnect with the wider community of intelligent species. They had hoped for peaceful contact but prepared for hostile encounters. Now the moment had arrived and they welcomed it despite their apprehension. Haven stood ready to take its place among the civilizations of the galaxy as an independent sovereign power. Ambassador Sixra responded with equal formality. She spoke on behalf of the Kryn Empire and the other assembled galactic powers. She said they welcomed Haven into the community of spacefaring civilizations. They acknowledged Haven's sovereignty and independence. They recognized Haven's technological achievements and cultural accomplishments. They hoped for friendship, cooperation, and mutual benefit between Haven and the established galactic powers. The galaxy was vast enough for all to prosper and wise enough to prefer peace over conflict. She formally invited Haven to establish diplomatic relations with the Empire and other interested governments. Negotiations continued for months, as both sides worked out the practical details of Haven's integration into galactic society. Haven agreed to limited technology sharing, focusing on medical advances and environmental technologies that could benefit billions of beings throughout the galaxy. They would not share military technology or fundamental forerunner principles that could be misused. In return, they received formal recognition of their sovereignty, protection from potential threats through mutual defense agreements, and access to galactic trade networks that would allow exchange of goods and cultural products. Haven made their position absolutely clear on one critical point. They would never be conquered, colonized, controlled, or absorbed by any galactic power. They would engage with the galaxy as equals or not at all. They would defend their independence with whatever force was necessary. This was non-negotiable. The assembled powers agreed because they had no real choice. Haven's defensive capabilities were too strong and their potential as allies was too valuable. It was far better to have Haven as friend than as enemy. Commander Zalthar, who had been promoted to admiral for his handling of the initial contact, found himself serving as military liaison between Haven and the Empire. He made regular visits to Haven, coordinating on various security matters. On one such visit, he walked through the city's parks with Lisa Grant, enjoying the pleasant weather and beautiful surroundings. The parks demonstrated Haven's philosophy of blending technology with nature in harmonious ways. Trees grew around buildings and fountains used gravity manipulation to create impossible water sculptures. Lisa told Zalthar that Haven was preparing to send exploration ships beyond their system for the first time in millennia. They had finally developed technology that could safely navigate through the spatial barrier that had trapped them. They were going to explore the galaxy carefully and thoughtfully, learning about other civilizations firsthand. They wanted to find their place in the larger community of intelligent species. They also wanted to search for Earth and discover what had happened to humanity's homeworld during the 10,000 years of separation. Zalthar asked what would happen if they found Earth and discovered that